Welcome to the History Stories podcast. Get ready, history buffs, because today we're going on a kind of spooky historic road trip.
Yeah, we're ditching the boring textbooks and diving into those freaky echoes between two American presidents. You know, the big ones, all based on the cool stuff you sent us, by the way.
You got it.
Yeah.
Today it's all about that list of coincidences everyone talks about, the one linking Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, two guys who shaped their times, and then bam, both met these really similar tragic ends. So we're gonna pick apart the details, see what's real and what's just a good story, and explore why this whole thing, still kind of freaks people out. It's like your guide to understanding this weird bit of American folklore, all thanks to the material you guys sent in. Exactly. We've been digging into those history books and all those sources you gave us, trying to, really break down these supposed parallels. Our mission on this historic road trip is to see if those claims hold water, understand the historical context, and figure out what these connections, real or not, are trying to tell us. So first things first, let's talk about, well, the heart of it all those creepy similarities people have noticed between Lincoln and Kennedy, their lives, their deaths. It's pretty wild when you see it all laid out.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, and your sources point this out, is how this whole idea blew up after JFK was assassinated. I mean, the nation was still in shock, trying to process this huge event. And the Warren Commission was, well, it was controversial. People started noticing these little overlaps, and boom, it kind of took on a life of its own. Magazines, trivia books, and then, of course, the internet, it all just fueled the fire.
It is kind of creepy, right? It's like our brains are wired to find patterns, especially when something awful happens. It's almost like we're trying to make sense of it, find some kind of order in the chaos. Make you wonder, right? Like, is there something more to it? What do you think it is about this list that really gets to people?
I think you hit the nail on the head. We're naturally drawn to patterned connections. Our brains are looking for them all the time, even when they don't exist. And when we're dealing with tragedy, that urge to find meaning, well, it just goes into overdrive. And here's the thing, not all these coincidences are equal. It's important to remember that.
Totally. I mean, some of these parallels are actual historical facts, no doubt about it. Others, not so much. Some are disputed, or maybe they're true, but with, nuances and details that change the whole picture. And then there are those unexplained ones. Those are interesting because they add to that spooky feeling, even if it's just random chance. The real mystery, as your sources point out, isn't necessarily about some spooky connection. It's about why this specific list became so popular, why people latch onto it. It's about that blurry line between like actual history and the stories we tell ourselves, folklore.
Absolutely. And to really get this whole thing, we got to go back in time. Let's start our historic road trip in Lincoln's time, the 1860s. It was a completely different world. And think about it. The country was literally ripping itself apart. The Civil War. Political divisions were like insanely intense. Can you imagine?
It's crazy, right? And Lincoln was in the thick of it. He was like this super controversial figure at the time, trying to hold the nation together. Your sources actually make a great point about how slow communication was back then. Everything was by telegraph or like printed newspapers. That definitely shaped how news spread and how people reacted to it.
Now, jump ahead exactly 100 years to Kennedy's time, the 1960s. Totally different scene, but still a lot of tension. You had the Cold War, this constant fear of nuclear war, and the Civil Rights Movement, which was like this huge societal shift.
Oh, and don't forget the media. By then, television was everywhere. People were seeing events unfold right in their living rooms, which was brand new. It was like they felt closer to everything. And Kennedy, well, there was this whole Camelot image around him, all about youth and hope. So when he was assassinated, it was even more shocking, more impactful, which a lot of your sources really stress.
Okay, so here's where it gets even weirder on our historic road trip. This list of coincidences, it didn't just appear out of nowhere after Kennedy died. Your sources say it really took off in the late 60s, early 70s. Publications like Ripley's Believe It or Not, all those trivia books, they really helped spread the word.
It kind of makes sense, right? You have a nation still grieving over JFK, still confused, still arguing about the Warren Commission and what really happened, and then boom, here's this list, all these strange parallels. Maybe it was a way for people to cope, or maybe it just made things even more confusing. Who knows?
One thing that's really interesting, according to your sources, is that while both assassinations were obviously huge news, investigated like crazy, and spawned countless conspiracy theories, this list of coincidences, well, it never really got official attention. It stayed in that realm of pop culture, like those fun facts you'd see in a magazine or online.
Right. And then as the internet started taking off, you had skeptics and historians like Martin Gardner, websites like Snopes. They really started digging into those claims, debunking a lot of them, pointing out mistakes, and this thing called selection bias. Basically, it's like when you only focus on the things that do match up and ignore all the things that don't.
And yet, even with all that debunking, the list is still around. It's like this super resilient cultural myth shared online all the time. It's like a classic American urban legend,
Hmm.
makes you think about fate, destiny, all that stuff. Why do you think it's stuck around for so long?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think part of it is, well, it's a good story. It's simple, it's spooky, and it taps into that human need to find meaning in history, even if it's, kind of dark.
Okay, so let's dive into some of the theories people have come up with to explain all of this. We should probably start with the one that's, uh, well, the most grounded in reality, the skeptic's view. That's what your sources really focus on.
Right. Most historians and statisticians, they'll tell you it's all just coincidence. I mean, think about it. Any two lives, especially lives as documented as presidents, there are bound to be some overlaps if you look hard enough. It's kind of like slipping a coin a million times. You're going to get some crazy streaks of heads or tails just by chance. It's what they call the law of large numbers.
And your sources really highlight this point. People don't usually focus on all the ways Lincoln and Kennedy were different, right? That's the selection bias thing we talked about. It's
Yeah.
like you buy a red car, and suddenly you see red cars everywhere. It's not that there are more red cars, it's just that you're noticing them more.
Yeah.
Same with this list. People remember the hits, the coincidences, and forget about all the stuff that doesn't match up.
Yep. And as we'll get into later, some of those supposed coincidences, well, they're just plain wrong. People stretch the truth or make stuff up just to make the story fit. So the folks who believe in coincidences, they're mostly historians, people who like data, people who look for rational explanations.
Okay, so let's try something a little less data-driven. There's this idea called meaningful synchronicity. It comes from psychology, from Carl Jung. It's definitely more philosophical.
Yeah, it's like instead of cause and effect, these parallels are connected by meaning. It's called a causal connecting principles. Things happen at the same time and they seem related, but there's no direct link between them, no cause. It's like there's this deeper order to the universe that we don't fully understand.
So people who are into this idea, they might be into psychology or spirituality or even paranormal stuff. They feel like just saying it's all random chance, well, it doesn't explain that feeling of connection that these parallels create. It's like an aha moment. You see a pattern and it feels important, even if you can't explain why.
Then there are the more mystical explanations, ideas about fate, destiny, like history repeating itself. The fact that there's this 100-year gap between a lot of these events, well, that becomes really important in this view. It's like maybe history is on a loop, or maybe certain people and events are like preordained, destined to happen.
This is where things get kind of numerological, right? Like certain numbers have a deeper meaning.
Mm.
You'd probably find more people who believe this in like spiritual communities or people who are really into symbolism and stuff like that.
And then going even further out there on our historic road trip, there's the whole glitch in the matrix thing or cosmic resonance. This is definitely more modern kind of sci-fi.
It's almost like questioning the nature of reality, right? Maybe these similarities mean that everything's connected in ways we can't see, or maybe time repeats itself somehow. It's not really a scientific theory, more like a way of expressing how weird and unexpected all of this is.
Exactly. This one's popular with like sci-fi fans, people who think about philosophy, and those online communities that love exploring those really out there ideas.
And then there's this unspoken link to conspiracy theories. I mean, the list itself doesn't say there's one big conspiracy connecting both assassinations, but the sheer weirdness of it, it can make some people more open to the idea that, there are shadowy forces controlling everything.
That's a good point. The more bizarre and unexplainable things seem, the more some people might be like, aha, there's a hidden agenda here. Especially those who are already into conspiracy theories, particularly around JFK's assassination, as your sources mention.
So looking at all these ideas, the skeptics, with their focus on coincidence and bias, they're definitely the most grounded in facts. That's what your sources say too. But you can't deny that the list has this power. It tells a good story. It shows how our brains crave meaning, how we try to make sense of the world, even when it's really tough to do.
It's like this tug of war between logic and our need for a story, for something to make sense of it all. It's fascinating, really.
So this list has been around for a while now. What kind of mark has it left on us, on our culture? What's its legacy, according to your sources?
Well, for starters, it's definitely become part of pop culture. It's in tons of trivia books, those weird but true collections. And like we said, it was an early internet hit. People loved sharing it.
And it probably added to the mystique of Lincoln and Kennedy, don't you think? I mean, they were already huge figures in American history, but these coincidences, they almost made them into legends. It's like their lives were meant to be this way, you know?
Absolutely. Lincoln, the guy who saved the Union, died for it. And Kennedy, young, charismatic, gone too soon. These parallels, they just added this extra layer of, I don't know, intrigue to their stories, made them even more powerful.
And the crazy thing is, it's still alive and well as like a modern day folk tale.
Hmm?
It's like an urban legend that keeps popping up, especially online with each new generation. It's easy to share, it's spooky, and it's just believable enough to make you think, that's weird.
And it's definitely inspired a lot of those historical mysteries and conspiracy stories we see in movies and books, right? Even if it's not a direct inspiration, it feeds into that idea that there are hidden patterns in history, secrets waiting to be uncovered.
It's kind of funny, but your sources mention that this list is actually used as a teaching tool sometimes, like a way to show how our brains can trick us with things like selection bias and confirmation bias, how easy it is to believe something that sounds good even if it's not true.
It's a good lesson, actually. It shows us how important it is to be skeptical, to think critically, especially when we come across something that sounds too good to be true.
All right, so let's get specific on our historic road trip. Time to look at some of those claims, the famous coincidences, and see which ones are legit based on the historical record, what's actually true, and what's just, well, made up.
Okay, let's start with the true stuff, the things your sources confirm. First up, both Lincoln and Kennedy were elected to the U.S. House of Representatives exactly 100 years apart. Lincoln in 1846, Kennedy in 1946. That's pretty striking, right?
Yeah, it is. What about the presidential elections?
Same deal, 100 years apart, on the nose. Lincoln in 1860, Kennedy in 1960. Another confirmed coincidence, and a big one.
And their vice presidents, the ones who took over after they were assassinated.
Okay, this one is just crazy specific. Lincoln's VP was Andrew Johnson, born in 1808. Kennedy's VP was Lyndon B. Johnson, born in 1908, exactly a century apart. And get this, both were Southern Democrats who became president after an assassination. Talk about a weird set of coincidences. Your sources point this out too.
It really is. What about the day of the week they were killed?
Both on a Friday. Lincoln on Good Friday, April 14th, 1865. Kennedy on Friday, November 22nd, 1963. It's a sad parallel for sure.
And both were shot in the head. That's another tragic similarity, no doubt.
Yeah, that one's hard to ignore.
Okay, what about that claim about where their assassins went after the shootings where they were caught?
This one's mostly true, but with a twist. Booth, the guy who shot Lincoln, he ran from Ford's Theater and was eventually found and killed in a barn, which you could call a warehouse, I guess. Oswald, who shot Kennedy, well, he shot from a book depository, which is definitely a warehouse, and then he was caught in a movie theater. So it's kind of flipped, you know? Theater, then warehouse for Booth, warehouse, then theater for Oswald. But the theater warehouse thing is there in both cases.
And neither of them ever went to trial.
Nope. Booth was shot and killed about 12 days after killing Lincoln. And Oswald, well, everyone knows that story, Jack Ruby shot him just 2 days after Kennedy was killed.
There's also that thing about the name Ford.
Right. Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater.
Yeah.
And Kennedy was riding in a Lincoln Continental, which is made by, well, Ford. It's true, but it feels more like, I don't know, a word game than a real coincidence, if you ask me.
All right, so those are the ones to check out, according to the history books and your sources. Now let's talk about some of the more famous coincidences that are actually, well, not true.
Yeah, there are a bunch of those floating around. One of the big ones is that Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy who told him not to go to the theater that night. Totally made up. Lincoln's secretaries were John Nicolay and John Hay. There's no record of any Kennedy working for him. And while some people did warn him about his safety, this specific story, it's just not true.
What about that other secretary story, the one where Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln who warned him about going to Dallas?
That one's a little trickier. Kennedy's secretary was Evelyn Lincoln, and she did tell him she was worried about the trip to Dallas. So there was a secretary named Lincoln who warned Kennedy, but there wasn't a secretary named Kennedy who warned Lincoln. You know what I mean?
And that thing about the assassins being born 100 years apart?
Nope, not true either. John Wilkes Booth was born in 1838. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939. So they were actually born 101 years apart, not exactly century like the story says. Close, but not quite.
And that wild one about Lincoln being in Monroe, Maryland, with someone named Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe the week before he was killed. That's gotta be fake, right?
Oh yeah, that one is completely made up. Marilyn Monroe died way before Kennedy, back in 1962, and there's no such place as Monroe, Maryland. At least not back then. Lincoln did visit Fort Monroe in Virginia, but that was years earlier. This one seems like someone just made it up to make the list even crazier.
So the big takeaway here is, while there are some truly strange similarities between Lincoln and Kennedy, their lives and their deaths, a lot of the stuff you hear, well, it's just not true. It's exaggerated or completely made up. The story, as it often does, has become more interesting than the actual facts, which your sources do a great job of explaining.
Yeah, I mean, the real coincidences are interesting enough, but adding all that fake stuff, it just shows how these stories can, like, change over time, how they can become more and more dramatic, less and less accurate.
So, as we wrap up our historic road trip, what have we learned from all of this, based on the material you guys sent us?
I think we've seen that these Lincoln Kennedy coincidences, they're this weird mix of actual historical facts, some stretched truths, and a whole lot of fiction. They don't prove anything supernatural or like a big conspiracy, but they do show how we deal with tragedy, how we try to find patterns and make sense of history, even when when it's really tough to do.
And for you, our fellow history buff who shared these sources with us, this whole thing is a reminder to be skeptical, to think critically, especially when something sounds too amazing to be true. It's easy to get caught up in a good story, but it's important to look at the facts, which your sources really emphasize.
And if you're still curious, want to learn more, keep digging. Check out websites like Snopes. They do a great job of debunking myths. You can also look at historical archives, find primary sources about both assassinations. And if you're feeling philosophical, you could look into that synchronicity concept we talked about. It's a whole other way of thinking about coincidences.
At the end of the day, the reason people still talk about this list, maybe it's not just about the facts. Maybe it's about how it makes us think about history, about how strange and unpredictable it can be. What other weird connections are out there waiting to be discovered? That's something to think about until our next historic road trip.